Hey, welcome back to the Health Bridge. Pedram here, talking about different kinds of medicine. And when it comes to health problems, there are a lot of quick fix solutions out there. I rant about this all the time, and so I'm happy to say that my guest today doesn't believe in them either. Dr. Michael Finkelstein is a board certified in internal medicine and integrative holistic medicine. And he's a fellow of the American College of Physicians. He sees most health challenges as a result of an imbalance in our bodies and our lives, and most of the quick fix crap out there just exasperates these imbalances. Dr. Michael advises a slow medicine approach, identifying the root cause and then creating a step-by-step system and a long-term response to it. I must say, I'm always interested in approaches that move away from that assembly line medical care, because these trendy fixes and these cookie cutter prescriptions simply just don't cut it. So I would like to welcome to the show, Doc. I think slow medicine is a fascinating concept, and I would love to take our time and talk about it here.
Sounds like a good plan.
Yeah, hey, welcome. So how did you start looking at this micro versus macro in medicine and really identifying that our lives and our treatment algorithms can't exist separately?
Well, when I was very young and decided to become a doctor, Western medicine was really offering something that was extraordinary compared to what existed previously. I was about 7 in 1967 when I made that decision, so I was very, very young. And you can think back to that time when men were about to land on the moon, when antibiotics were taking care of illnesses that would kill people previously, heart disease was being managed in cardiac care units. There was a lot to be said for Western medicine at that time, and that was really what drew me into it. But when I got to medical school in the early 80s, graduated, I realized that the Western medical model was quite limited. There were a lot of people suffering from chronic ailments. They weren't getting better. I was doing my best to apply what I had learned, but there was still something left that was clearly not being addressed. And what I realized was the world around us is moving so fast that we're bombarded with so much in our system that can only handle so much. And the pressure is to do more and more and move faster. The quick fix solution is an example of what people are seeking, because that's how our culture has evolved. But what I say now is that fast then is the disease. It's the common denominator for the inflammatory processes that really underlie almost all of the ailments that people are looking to avoid or deal with. So if fast is the disease, then slow is the medicine. What we need to do is to get into a different rhythm, a rhythm where we can handle more of it, but we're also not losing sight of why we want to be healthy to begin with, which is to connect, to have relationships with other people, with the planet, with something more universal, maybe divine. That's why we want to be healthy. But if we are only thinking about our bodies, our blood tests, numbers, we get distracted and lost in another world. And Western medicine isn't even going to be able to deal with that either. So we need something different.
It's a tough rap, right? You spend so much of your life, your time, your energy, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, you probably a little cheaper when you went through medical school, but you come into this position where you realize that the solution set that you can offer isn't necessarily the right one exclusively, because you are in a quick fix model, right? People come to you, there's 30 people in the waiting room, and they're like, hey doc, fix it.
Yeah, if that's my first choice as well. If I could do that, if somebody came to me and I had the wand or I had the pill that would get rid of their ailment, I would do that, no question.
Right.
But what I find is that works less than 10% of the time. So the other 90%, people are walking around limping, getting crutches, but they're not necessarily getting better. And when they're ailing like that, they also, because of other lacking of certain wisdom and organization and orientation, they lose track of their lives. So doctors, maybe, Western physicians aren't the person to go to for all of that. But I thought as an individual, having had that medical training, I could offer a little bit more than just the Western medical model.
Yeah, I love that. And it's a challenge. First of all, Harry Potter has a wand, the rest of us don't. And when you talk about drugs, the fallout, there's certain medications, I mean, they save lives. There's a time and a place for them. But when we start looking at chronic disease, we start looking at all these kind of ailments that our culture is suffering from. It ain't that pretty, and the pill isn't a long-term fix. And maybe the closest you can get is having the pill be a long-term Band-Aid for a long-term problem. But when we start looking at actually getting to the etiology, the origin of the problem, you're right. People are walking around with crutches, and the question is, what's wrong? What's wrong with the leg?
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is, we could have a bad leg and still have a great life. So part of the Western mindset is, if I'm ailing at all, I really don't have a good life. That definition is part of another problem that we see in our culture, which is this negativism, and not being able to see the beauty that is almost always in existence. And part of the treatments that I offer, if you want to use that word, is to help people get reacquainted with the quality of their life as being the primary subject. And therefore, every meal, every encounter, every book, every movie can be seen from that perspective, and we can pull out much more juice in living.
It really speaks to kind of the duality, or the kind of polar nature of our culture, right? Either you're healthy or you're sick, right? Either you're young or you're old, and the question of continuity and where we fall on that continuum is a difficult one. It's a challenging one, right? So
exactly. I've learned the most, I would say, from the oldest patients, or I've seen, or even younger people when they were dying, that reflected at that time in their lives, a really serious time, on what the meaning of life was. For them, of course, as an individual, but then when I looked at all the people that I had those conversations with, and as a physician I had the privilege of having many of those conversations, there was really one unifying theme. It's all about the quality of my relationships, who I connected with, my life. It's not the quantity, it's not even the longevity, which of course we'd like to live as long as possible, but with quality. Can't give up quality for quantity ever, and as it turns out, an investment in quality is an investment in quantity.
It's interesting. I'm traveling the country and the world right now, making a movie about, it's called Prosperity. It's about the new economy and how we can elect for a better world with our money. And one of the themes that keeps coming up is that this quantity economy is now being transformed into people who are demanding quality, whether it's through Etsy, whether it's through time getting a handcrafted piece of something versus some more crap from China. And so I don't think medical science, I don't think lifestyle and any of this stuff was immune to that. And we all kind of fell into this phantasm, if you will, of quantity being the answer. And yeah, sure, we could produce a lot of crap in our factories, but what good is that to our ecology? And yeah, you could probably do 100 more things in a day, but what does that do to your quality of life?
Exactly. In fact, we can overconsume to the point where we are so satiated, we're stuffed. This is what affects our system on a physiological basis. The sympathetic nervous system is in this chronic fight or flight state. And that's when we get our ailments. We can't even enjoy what there is. And so this is, part of our times. I think there's something good in it that we have gone to the edge of the pendulum swing. We've seen that all this technology, all these things that we can possess, that we can control, doesn't really give it to us. What we need is to bring the pendulum back toward the middle, not shirking the value of the technology that has contributed to a lot of healing, a lot of help in a lot of other ways, but we need enough, not too much. We don't need the extraordinary overstimulation that we are now dealing with.
Yeah. So when it comes to health, what is enough?
Well, that's a good point. I think it's very personal, but for most people, it's less than they're getting right now, less than they're doing. In other words, the to-do lists that most of us have, whether we actually write them down, just dream about them at night and keeps us awake, or gets us waking up in the morning nauseated because we've got so much to deal with, that's evidence that we have a little bit more than we can handle. And that actually has a cellular effect, right? So that this is not just on our mind, but what's on our mind is in our body, because the mind has tremendous effects on the cellular basis. I've seen many of your discussions with other people, and you've covered that many times. It is a very powerful factor that we're now coming to terms with. So the opposite is true. We can cultivate peace and tranquility in our minds, which is to restore a flow in life that's a little bit more in relationship to the natural world's rhythms and cycles. The day-night cycle, the weekly cycle, a lunar cycle, seasonal cycles of life. We then can achieve that state of harmony. And actually, I think our cells thrive in that environment. So if your goal is still to live a long life, that's how I would recommend doing it.
You know, nature can't help but be real. You're sitting in New York right now, and I can hear the thunderstorm outside your window.
Right.
You can't help but notice that, right? It's happening.
Well,
It's real.
and for many of us who are sensitive to changing barometric pressure, you could feel it coming hours before, and the air quality, not just the quality, but the weight of the air, what it feels like in terms of your energy. We are connected. Even if we think we're immune to it because of our HVAC systems or whatever we've got, no, we're not. So the best advice I can give to people is to just step outside, is to live and deal with the rhythms of the planet and get connected there, connect with other people. That's why I think gardening is one of the things we offer here on this farm where I live and work, is gardening. It's the perfect exercise, if you will. You're outside, you're in nature, you're often working with other people, you're cultivating something that you might actually eat and assimilate in your body, but you're soaking up sunlight yourself and the enriched soil and the water, and it's creative and it's beautiful and it's healthy multitasking. That's what I call it. And it's nature is the driving force of all that. Every once in a while you break a leg, you go to an orthopedist.
So you are a medical doctor who's practicing medicine, who lives and works on a working farm where patients can come and get their hands in the soil. Is that what I heard? Am I hearing that right?
Yes, you got that right. Because to me, I was in a clinical office for a long time. I was the medical director of a hospital. I understand what it feels like from a patient's perspective, because I heard it so many times, just to deal with the parking and then get into the hospital and the smells and the waiting and the other people sitting in the waiting room. It upsets most people. That's a sympathetic nervous system stimulus. That's antithetical to health. So what I wanted to do is to bring myself out of that environment into one of the more holistic and peaceful environments I can think of, which is a working farm with animals and plants and nature all around. And so I live and work in an old restored barn. People come to see me. I've got wood floors and live edge shelves you might be able to see behind me. I sort of call my office a treehouse. And the idea is to immediately help people relax. They see, even when they're here, how different they can feel with nothing more than an environmental and a perspective shift. That's what I want to empower.
Do you have busy people? So you're several miles outside of New York City. Do you have busy people come out and kind of stay in some sort of bed and breakfast and hang there for a while? How does this work?
Yeah, there are places like that around. From New York City, it's about a 50-mile-an-hour train. So there's thousands of places to stay between me and the city, an hour away. So there's no shortage of options. But one of the things that people do remark on, when I even think of coming to you, I start feeling better. And then when they step on the property, they have a transformative experience. And so we have day-long programs. We have a lot of gardening surrounded activities. We have evening programs. And people come and go quite regularly. I live and work here with my wife. And I would say every day, 7 days a week, there are people in our home, outside of our home, living in this microcosm of a community, which is what we hope is not just giving people advice, but bringing them to a place where they can enact it and they can do it with other people.
It's funny, you think of the guy who is going to a doctor's office in Manhattan, and he's standing outside your waiting room finishing up a call, and then he comes in and signs in somewhere and sits there and does like 4 or 5 emails, and then goes and sits in some other sterile room and handles a couple emails, or gets on a call and gives your assistant or someone one of these fingers and just like blah, 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 and then finally you're like, hey, how can I help you? And they've never left the world that's causing their pathology, versus the juxtaposition of the vision that you just painted, which is you come to the land and you actually have a phase change. You come out here and you are in a different space, and from that space we could actually talk about real healing. I love it. It's great.
I think people ultimately, get advice, like they get a map, but they have to learn to navigate the course themselves, because sometimes, as you know, when you go on a trip, the unexpected occurs. The road's closed, it's nightfall. So I want people to be able to experience it and feel it for themselves, because that helps them navigate. That helps them find their way back. And also gives them a sense of empowerment and control over their destiny. And part of what I want them to do immediately is to recognize that it can also feel good and be fun right away. It's not like you have to wait forever, even though what I do I call slow medicine. It doesn't mean that the results are slow. It means you live your life in a different rhythm and you achieve what you want much sooner. In fact, I call it the best quick fix for your health.
So you have great case studies because you work with people in Manhattan, which is kind of like the boiling cauldron of America, if you will. So
the epicenter of fast is what I would call it.
It is where fast then propagates and goes all other places in the United States, right? And sure, we got different flavors of fast, but that's kind of known as the fast epicenter. So these people, you're saying we need to slow down because that's what health is about and that's what we're going to do. And they're like, dude, I've got $45,000 a month of overhead. I've got payroll. I've got my mortgage. I've got my car payments. I can't afford slow. Right?
Yeah.
And they're on drugs and they're not doing well.
Well, a lot of people push back like that.
Yeah.
And I can't convince everybody. I'll be honest. I cannot convince everybody. Some people are moving so quickly or they're so anxious about the change that they hold off. So some people need to be motivated by a personal life crisis or something else that happens around them. And, I would say I'd rather try to help people do that sooner than later, but people are on their own time course. It's not for me to judge. I just make myself available. But you're right, a lot of people resist because it's like going against the current. The wave here is going in a different direction. However, most people have tried it that way. They've tried it the fast way.
Yep.
And I say to them, so how do you feel? They've tried the diet, the way that is in a lot of books. How's that working for you? So with enough experience, people might say, maybe it's time for something different.
Yep. If I'm a doctor listening to this, thinking, okay, man, this guy was the medical director of a hospital, and now he's out in the sticks doing hippie medicine. What kind of results are you seeing in relation to the kind of efficacy? As when you're in a hospital, you see everything, you have access to all the data, but I'm sure you're tracking what's happening over there, and you're not a crazy man, so you must be seeing something good.
Well, I get reinforced by two types of results. One is people whose ailment goes away, and the other are people who may still have some lingering symptoms. However, their life improves. I actually think that the latter is the most important target, because what I'm really about is helping people just get back on the course of their life, find the meaning of their life, maybe even learn from their illness. Their illness sometimes can correct the course that they're on so that they could really reorganize their priorities and get back with their kids, get back with their families and a meaningful job as opposed to just going through the motions of life. So I would say the latter, or what I just described, happens to nearly everybody that I see who takes it seriously. They have to make the adjustments, but once they hear the message and if they make some fundamental changes in terms of that rhythm and start seeing themselves as worthy of being taken care of that way, I think most people get remarkable results, and pretty quickly. They feel immediately optimistic that they can get there because it's like all of a sudden now the map shows them where they're going. I give them really 2 points that they may not have clearly seen before. One is where they are now. I ask them a lot of questions to help them understand how the facets of their life are interrelated and how they're actually working for them, and then where they're going. So I asked a question as an example. If I was a magician, and I did have that one, and I could wave it and get rid of all your ailments, now what would you do with your life? So I start from there, and most people get that. The second group of people, though, maybe from my colleagues in medicine perspective, would be, do they get better? And anecdotally, many people come in, I guess the most black and white illness that I see often enough that's relatively easy to deal with is diabetes. So when people have non-insulin dependent diabetes or adult onset diabetes, or often called type 2 diabetes, they, with a high likelihood, can get rid of that condition metabolically following slow medicine. So that's pretty high. When people have inflammation, joint inflammation, when they have autoimmune conditions, when they have allergies, asthma, people with headache syndromes, most of those people have remarkable results in a few weeks. And it's not just diet. because there are a lot of things that can be said and we can talk about in terms of, you could ask the follow-up question, well, how do you do it? I mean, an orientation toward food is a big part of all of that, but there's the other dots. It's the relationships. It's what's on your mind when you go to sleep. How are you resting? What are you doing? Are you taking a day off a week? I'll call it a Sabbath, but are you doing something one day a week where you disconnect from the busyness of life, the fast world, and then you reestablish your own rhythm and balance?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one for a lot of people.
It's not an easy thing for people to do in our world. Yeah, especially since everything is on 24/7.
Well, and your wand that you're alluding to, it's like you're saying, if I had a magic wand and I could wave it over and make all this go away, what would you be doing with your life? That almost seems like a question that would stump a lot of people because they never thought about that in the first place. That's why they ended up in the kind of dark alley that got them that sick, and in your care. But that's not something we've really been trained to think about in our world, right? We just do what we're doing because that's what we were doing, and we had some bills, and we got someone pregnant, and I mean, it's just people just end up in the lives that they've ended up in, and the introspection is really something that you're calling to the table. That must make some people uncomfortable.
It makes most people uncomfortable, except it lets most people get to a point beyond the discomfort, and there are a lot of analogies like that. Without this discomfort, where would we be? We'd be, lingering somewhere without a lot going on in our lives. Challenges are helpful to us because they get us moving, and ultimately we can learn about the purpose of our own personal lives. Most people get excited once they get past the discomfort that now I have an opportunity to do this. Many people need a certain level of maturity to get there, and that may take decades of life. Most people may need to get past their midlife crisis, where they start trying to go back into their youthful phase, see if they can recapture that, until they wake up with the required amount of wisdom and balance and discipline to do some of these things. On the other hand, it's not only people at that stage. Some people are younger and they just get it. They get excited about seeing clearly. And that's what's often missing from people's lives. You're right. We've not been exposed to this. It's not what most of our teachers talk about. Parents often are also in the middle of their lives and can't just sit their children down and have such a conversation. But it's a meaningful one. I can't think of anything I could do that as a doctor, as a friend, as a personal assistant, offer somebody more than help them get back into the life they were meant to live.
Yeah, and that's not a conversation that's had in hospital corridors, even with the therapy department, right? You're dealing with gross pathology. You're not finding a direction and putting someone on a path that is actually upward and onward. And that's a real criticism of the medical community. But frankly, if you look at our history in kind of allopathic medicine, at least, the history of allopathic, it's not our history for me because I'm on the eastern side, is, a lot of it was battlefield medicine. A lot of it was MASH unit, this guy's bleeding out, let's fix it. And so now it's crossed over into realms that handle a lot of kind of human fallout that it's not really adept at. And so, it's overgrown its scope in a lot of ways.
Well, you're right, and I think in fairness to my colleagues, to ask them these questions maybe is unfair.
Yeah.
They're good at certain things. They have certain tools in their toolbox. Let's call it a hammer and a nail. Well, what can you do with a hammer and a nail? I mean, there's only some things you can do, but you can't paint the car. Right. So, and you can't drive it for the person either. So, I want to, reinforce the value of Western medicine by saying when you're that sick, you go to a hospital emergency room and you get saved. But what are you going to do after you're stabilized? Who's going to guide you? And I think that's when we need the wisdom of conversations like this that many people can have with us and communities that support us. And very often, though, what I find very interesting is that it takes a person's personal physical ailment to get them to start thinking this way, because they've tried the quick fix remedies and that hasn't really done it for them. So now it's obvious. The next question is, well, what else is there? And they may not look here, but here is one of the places that you can look that may provide meaning.
That's unfortunate. A lot of people will keep banging away because they can until the migraines or the chest pains or, the sciatica stop them. And, at that point, I mean, there might be a fallout. There might be, something that lingers for the rest of your life because you did break something, and we can break, and it's a challenge. So, trying to get ahead of it is great. You have a lot of people in upstate New York, presumably, and also people from Manhattan, getting people's hands in the dirt. What is that doing for them and their health? Are people going back and starting gardens, or doing organic, CSAs or something? Like, supply chain's a huge thing in my world.
Well, some people are. They're getting excited about the quality of the produce. People can talk about what to put on your plate, and that's pretty well done now. I think we know more vegetables, but where those vegetables come from and what it's like when you're eating those vegetables are two other variables that you can address. So I like the idea of the artistic approach to creating food for your plate and then being able to sit and enjoy a meal as if it's Thanksgiving, and that you're really in a state of gratitude. You're in that place of mind, because then your mind and your body connect at the point of digestion and assimilation of those nutrients, and then you get the full benefit of it. So when people come to this farm, yes, they stick their hands in dirt, and of course, for a lot of people, that's a new experience, especially if you lived in the city. There's science now that tells you that the microbiome, meaning the bacteria and other organisms that live in that dirt, especially if it's healthy dirt, is actually very good for you. I mean, people are swallowing pills called probiotics. You could just eat a carrot from my garden and get that. Mm-hmm. So the idea is sometimes what's underneath your nail is good enough if it comes from the right environment. So people are getting that. And as I talked about before, the healthy multitasking in a garden, you're moving, you're out in nature, often you're with other people, you're doing something creative. It's very stimulating on a lot of different levels, which is really wholesome, quite an activity, in fact. But then, people go back to their apartments in the city and they get a 8-inch clay pot and they stick some herbs in it and they stick it on the window, and now every meal they can have their own parsley, or they can have their own rosemary, or they can have something that could add a real energetic to their plate whenever they're eating. And that is almost like the photographs we have on the walls of our favorite places and people. When we walk by it, we feel uplifted. And one can do that with an attention to growing and connecting to living organisms, in particular plants, that we will ultimately assimilate into our body.
Yep, and that's not where pharma hangs its hat, and it's it's the baseline of real good medicine. And you're right, it's slow. Anyone who's got a garden knows. If I plant something tomorrow, maybe I'll see it in 30, 60, 90 days, right? And that's just a small percentage of the produce my family consumes on a daily basis. And you get a real sense of how long it takes to bring up a good carrot or a tomato, and you have a little bit more reverence as well. So that's a powerful narrative that I think a lot more doctors will cross into following your example once we kind of get to the roots of where medicine really is. And to me, I think this is just the beginning. You're a Renaissance man, but you're on the right track. So what that's going to do is it's going to create a whole industry of farm to table in a different way doctors, right?
Well, I think so. One of the interesting things, I have a radio show that I did this afternoon, a couple hours ago. In fact, I was interviewing a physician who wrote a book. And in that book, she wrote, I learned in the middle of my practice that I would not want to be taking any of the medications that I've been prescribing to my patients. And so the truth is, most doctors don't even want their own medicine. And so I'm hopeful that a lot of physicians will catch on to this, because I know in their own lives, when they get to that point where they need something, they're all asking for something better than what we've got. Again, occasionally, 10% of the time or less, we need to be in an emergency room, we need to be on an operating table, and we're so grateful that those are available. But most of the time, what we need is a community, a farm, the presence of mind to be in a state of gratitude for the things we do have, and a way to appreciate the course, the meaning, the particular value of our own lives, and deal with the mortality. It's not so easy either, and the pain. However, there are ways of doing better, even with those things happening, which has a lot to do with what goes on in our mind and what we're really paying attention to.
Yeah, and a lot of times, you look at religious experience, mortality and pain are wonderful teachers to kind of bring us back to what's important. right?
Yeah.
A lot of people wouldn't be asking these questions had they not had some diagnosis that kind of pulled them off the superhighway so they could smell the flowers. And
Yeah. I mean, that's the irony of it. As a physician, I would love to get rid of all pain, but then where would we be? This is not obviously something I would say to an individual in pain, but the fact is pain has a purpose. It's the noxious pain of just stepping on a nail and pulling your foot away is the obvious good use of pain. But the chronic pain is a little bit different, but still it motivates people. And for many people, it's life-giving in a special way. And I'm not the one who's decided to do it this way, but given that this is how it is, what I want to be able to do is help people preserve and restore the quality of their lives, even in the face of that. And then, as I said, what I find actually, uplifting is when people focus on the quality and these things that I offer in the concept of soul medicine, obviously other people do as well, is the body does heal. This is how the body heals. If you tried the quick fix, if you tried the supplements, if you tried all of that and it's still not working, try another approach, connect a little bit more dots.
There's a few of these models I've been looking at with organic farming, following some of these guys around for our next movie. And sometimes it's hard to make it work financially for some of these organic farms, being in communities where, the real estate value is high and all that. So selling vegetables, a lot of these guys are just barely making ends meet. But if you took two industries and brought them together, so like say organic farming and traditional medicine, then you actually have a financial model that would help subsidize the organic farming and also create the throughput to the customer base, which could really, justify holding down the property and all these things. So listening to this as a physician, it's an interesting kind of intermediation. So it's an interesting way to kind of take your skill set, apply it to something where you can hold real property, get your hands in the dirt, really start creating, produce and medicine and herbs and all these things in the ground, and kind of kick it old school, right? And be a part of a solution, not just for your patient base, but ecologically, environmentally, sequestering carbon, all the good stuff that happens with organic farming. So I like it. I like where you've taken this, and I hope that you can inspire physicians across the country and the world to follow suit, because then the organic farms become kind of bastions of lifestyle and health and all these wonderful things that we all need and we all are proponents of. But as a physician, you weren't tied into that supply chain, and so you could just tell people to eat organic, but what does that mean?
Yeah, I think that until more of this is connected and becomes the way of life, it's going to still be fits and starts, and there'll be obviously areas that are strong and some that, where there are gaps. However, if you step back and look at what's gone on over the last 50 years since I was 7 in 1967, more or less, there's been a lot of change. And it's accelerating. So I'm very hopeful. I also see that, in a sense, we have our individual lives and we care about how we're feeling. When somebody says, "How are you doing?" It's from usually the ego-me point of view. But the fact is, I think, to some extent, we're really a collective. We're a group of organisms living together, the way bees live together in a colony. And we're seeing an exponential synergistic growth occur as a result of how so many people are moving. And even though we can always point to those that are lagging and areas that still need work, we're getting closer to a critical mass. And what you're describing as industries and institutions that's working symbiotically, I think we're getting closer to that. I don't know when it will happen, but I'm feeling it, and I'm very optimistic. And that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, well, it's already happened, right? Because it happened with you,
Yep.
And now you're a case study and an example of a working model. And that's what the world needs, is working models, so that they can, a lot of people need to emulate, a lot of people will innovate, but you're living on a farm, and people are coming to you because that makes sense. And I love the promise of slow medicine. I think it's a very great concept, and the fact that you're holding it down and you're out there in a thunderstorm and not some tower in your white coat, that's cool. Like I would come to that clinic. I would come to that doctor. So how can people find you? How can people find more information about slow medicine? And if a physician is like, "Hey, that sounds cool, I want to follow suit," would love for them to be able to collaborate with you.
Well, Slow Medicine Doctor is my website. Doctor spelled out, D-O-C-T-O-R. So Slow Medicine Doctor, those three words, no gaps, no capitals, .com is the easiest way to find me. And on there is the website, information about our practice, a lot of pictures of the farm, and a lot of things that I've written, a lot of other videos and articles that are part of the description and the effort to reach people in wherever they are, wherever they want to begin.
Fantastic. Listen, I'm glad you left the hospital and you're doing what you're doing. I think it's really cool. And keep up the good work, and I appreciate you being on the show. This is great.
Pleasure to talk to you.